Hi friends, I'm Millie most of the time and welcome back to another costume video. Today we're going to be covering my favorite costume I've ever made, which is my Edward Scissorhands costume. Typically I try to stay very lore accurate when I'm recreating a costume from a movie or a piece of media, but this time I really just wanted to put my own spin on things, use my own original design just based off of the character and just have a good time with it. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, we have to start at the beginning. This is me on Halloween 3 years ago, although the photo quality makes it look like 1991. So yes, I had technically already done an Edward Scissorhands costume, but let's be honest, I kind of didn't like it at all. I wanted to do my favorite character justice, so I began getting some designs and some fabric to have this costume ready in time for a summer convention. Did I mention I had 3 weeks? This is the part where everyone learns that I do not know how to draw. As always, I started out with little poorly drawn cartoon mock-ups of some ideas I had. I was really going for Edward Scissorhands meets Monster High, which was way before Mattel released the collab later in the year. When I blocked out the shape of the costume in normal clothes, I realized that having my arms out was not a good look, and even my attempt with using ripped tights for sleeves was just not looking great. So I decided against that and used my design for the skirt patterning, the boots, and the harness. I thrifted this long sleeve turtleneck leather suit that looked like leather but really wasn't, since I did not want to die at a summer convention. I wanted to use opaque tights under my skirt, so I repurposed some ones that I already had. I cut open the tights, not making any rounded holes, just smooth cuts. And I added grommets to the side and strung 1/8 of an inch black elastic through them to make them even more comfortable. And a handy tip, when using grommets that will go directly onto your skin, please use the kind that don't flower out on the back with a bunch of raw edges like these do, because I thought that they would just be uncomfortable, but I actually ended up cutting open my knee at the convention, so don't do that. But with that, my base was finished, easy peasy. Next was the skirt, less easy peasy. I made a half circle skirt pattern with my waist measurement, accounting for the extra seam allowance I would need for the 3 panels. I did some math, which meant using an online calculator, and this gave me the radius I needed to start cutting. I cut 3 pieces with identical waistlines and then just cut shapes I liked for the rest of the skirt. With larger scraps of fabric, I added more patches to the skirt to match my designs and just sewed everything together as I went. I wanted some panels to be stiff and others to be more flexible, so I backed some panels with scrap to give them shape. For the zipper, I just took it out of a skirt that I thrifted for the leather fabric, so I didn't waste anything. And I did not add a waistband because it was going to be way too bulky. Under the leather skirt, I had 3 layers. A slip skirt, a very full tutu, and this ragged tutu I got from Spirit Halloween. This way, I was able to achieve the poofy, yet kind of ragged look I was going for, like a cute Frankenstein skirt. I made the belts with any scrap fabric I had from the skirts. For the top belts, I measured my chest right under my underarms, and then the second one was 1.5 inches down, and then another one at 1.5 inches down. The chest belts were 1.25 inches wide. I made sure the belts were at the right length before adding any embellishments. I put on the topmost belt and measured the length I would need the shoulder straps to be. After turning the edges 1/4 inch, I grommeted the straps. For all the other belts, I also turned over a 1/4 inch hem on the raw edges. The belt buckles I acquired from Amazon, I just slid them on and made a belt hole with an awl to keep them in place. I used a combination of snaps and hook and bar fasteners to make sure these belts stayed in place. There was absolutely no stretch in these, so I had to make sure that they were as tight as possible to stay up all day at the convention, especially since I didn't really have the hands to fix any costume mishaps. And then I started to hand place studs on the belts, a different design or size for each one to give some more variety. Next was the giant moon belt around my waist. I cut and stitched 2 identical pieces of black leather I had used on the skirt and made a quilted pattern with my machine. I did not actually add quilt batting because I thought that would be way too hot. Like the top belts, I added hook and bar fasteners to keep the belt from going anywhere. After hand placing more of the studs, I started the moon belt. I molded oven-baked clay around a metal O-ring I had left over from my Ash Williams costume a couple years ago, and I used clay tools to make a little moon face. And then, using my best elementary school finger painting techniques, I just smudged black paint and wiped it off with a paper towel when it was almost dry to make the belt look aged. I glued it to the belt with super glue and a popsicle stick to hold it together. While my top did have a turtleneck, I made a faux turtleneck piece to look like the neck belts Edward has. I stitched 3 strips together, all identical in width, but shortening in length because I based it off the measurements of my neck. These belt buckles I had made with hot glue back when I did my first Scissorhands costume, and decided to reuse them because I was so short on time. I just attached them by stitching them on with gold thread. With the same technique I used on the other belts, I added fasteners to keep the neck piece on. I found some awesome black leather platform boots at the thrift and began to snazz them up with some scrap leather I had from cutting the skirt. Some leather scraps I grommeted, others I added belt buckles to. I just wanted each shoe to look a little different to emphasize the Frankenstein-like quality Edward has to his clothes. At this point, I was hurrying to finish my costume and was so thankful I had already made the scissor hands, but since this was 3 years ago, I have very few pictures, so please bear with me. If there's anything I remember about making my scissor hands was that I followed most of Alyson Tabbitha's YouTube tutorial, which I will be linking below because not only is she an amazing artist, but she goes very in-depth on her process, which helped me incredibly while making my own. I started with popsicle sticks and poster board, as all great cheap prop projects do. With patterns I purchased from Alyson Tabbitha's website, which I will also link below, I cut and glued popsicle sticks into the shapes I needed, coated in poster board, and created openings for my fingers with additional poster board. I coated everything with Mod Podge and left it to dry for a couple of days. After sanding down any bumps, I spray painted the blades silver, and then I super glued them to the gloves as I was wearing them to make sure they fit my fingers perfectly. Once dry, I glued handles from broken scissors to some of the blades, following the look from the film, and attached foam to make the blade and handle look more cohesive. For the top of the hand plates, I wore the glove with some thick gloves underneath and hot glued popsicle sticks to give it a structured look. I super glued a thin sheet of foam over the top. I also used hot glue dots as rivets, and then painted over the foam plate and the rivets with silver to look like metal. I weathered the foam by dabbing black paint around the edges and just smudging it with my finger, a process I repeated on the scissor blades as well. I painted the scissor handles burgundy and black and did some minimal weathering. And with that, they were pretty much done. I was so happy with how the costume turned out in the limited time I had. In the end, I was glad I went with the design choices I was debating with, because I felt like this end product was a lot more true to the character, as well as true to my own design and style. Well, that's a wrap on Scissorhands. Maybe I'll revisit this costume in the future if I want to add more embellishments or more belts, but for now, she's in a box. Alrighty friends, thank you so much for tuning in, and I shall see you next time for some more adventures in costuming. Bye!